in 2007, I attended a conference where the hotel key cards had these cute little quirky sayings that were written across them. And as I walked to my hotel room, I read the one that was on my key card, and I had an immediate thought: I need 2 of these. So I went back to the desk and asked for another, which ended up being an interesting exchange because the hotel attendant could not understand why I needed 2 when it was just me in this hotel room. But I simply explained to her I needed a second key. Just give it to me, with the exact same words as mine. See, I had already plotted to do something with these 2 keys. They were coming back to Baltimore with me, and they would soon be adorned in my then 1- and 3-year-old children's bedroom. And they do. In fact, they are a part of our bedtime ritual, where we recite every night as an affirmation out loud and in unison together. And we always walk in like you own the place. So I'll tell you that I wanted these keys framed in my children's bedrooms as a reminder daily for them to hold firm onto life's possibilities and also their capacity to attain whatever their hearts desired. So keep in mind, I know this is common nature because all parents hold true the same information for their children. But as I watched my 3-year-old son Niles grow into the handsome little boy that he is today, you're supposed to say, "Aw." He's a cutie. I am taking names and applications for future suitors. When I saw him grow into the child that he is today at 10 years old, I was then reminded daily of his experience in a country that would soon strip him of his childhood squills, that big grin of his, and those huge owl-like bright eyes, and instead would begin to project on him a persona of an adult male who was seen as menacing, threatening, and even at times seeing him as someone that was expendable in our society. Now, I know I'm not alone in my thinking. In fact, I know for sure that there are many mothers of color, in particular African American mothers, who know the reality to which I'm referring all too well. And in fact, I'm willing to bet that most of us should be familiar with that reality in present time. Largely because these 4 men in particular are faces that we've come to see and be familiar with time and time again. We've got Trayvon Martin, we have Jonathan Farrell, we have Najee Thomas, who Stephen spoke to us about earlier, one of the cases that happened in Baltimore City of the 14-year-old boy who was killed execution style in his bedroom. And then finally, most recently, Michael Brown of Ferguson, Missouri, where so many of the protests have ensued as of late. These are just to name a few of those young men who have been taken from us at such an early age. Now, what's interesting is that I teach a course on campus called Black Hair and Body Politics. Yeah, I know, interesting title, but we do some really cool stuff in this class as well. Because what we're doing is having a conversation about the way that hair impacts the way that we interact in our daily lives, and that's for all of us. I just happen to focus this conversation on the African American experience, where we explore what does your hair, and by extension your body, have to do with how you are able to engage or how people engage with you. At the end of the class, at the end of the semester, we host this event called Hair Stories. The campus community comes together in this kind of open mic setting, and we share what our hair story is. Like, what have been our experiences if we are someone that wears our hair bald, someone who wears their hair in locks like I do, someone who decides to wear their hair blonde instead of brunette or redhead. All of those impact the way that we actually see ourselves and how others see ourselves. But what's interesting about this particular event is every semester I have several young African American men in the class who share their stories. And those are the ones that I am most moved by, and I'll share why. Oftentimes, they share their stories as they're fighting back tears, and sometimes even rage over how they are responded to, how their bodies are responded to when they are in clothing stores, in their interactions with law enforcement, and even on college campuses, where oftentimes they find themselves having to, being found guilty and having to prove themselves as innocent. When I think about the hurt and frustration those particular students display, I shudder at what might be the reality for my son in a few short years. And while that can be a highly politicized issue for some, and you know what I'm talking about, the politicians debating, pundits commenting, and of course the protests that are ensuing around this issue, that's not the nature of my talk today. Because for those of us who are trying to raise young black boys in this country, who walk in like they own the place, this is a matter that demands our immediate action while we are also striving to work to protect our sons. Now, I don't suggest that parents of all races and ethnicities don't share a common angst and concern for their children, because I know they do. But the reality is the statistics and news stories alone that feature or bombard African American parents about the status of black boys in this country can overwhelm you in such a way that you almost feel defeated even before you start the journey, attempt the journey to give your son what he deserves. For example, homicide is the leading cause of death for African American males between the ages of 15 and 34. The unemployment rate for black males is double that of white males in this country. Or that stat that confirms for us that the prison industrial complex does in fact exist, this one is the most disturbing of them all, that 1 in every black male born today will experience the reality of prison at some time in their lifetime. It's pretty powerful. And like most parents, you hear such alarming, bone-chilling data and you proclaim, not my son. And so for me, there was a journey that began 4 years ago where I decided to join a committed group of individuals to found an all-board charter school in the heart of Baltimore City. Now, what's funny about this story, and I always like to tell this, is I'm no Susie Homemaker. In fact, let me be clear. I absolutely adore and love my children, but I dislike anything that represents a mother that looks like this. What am I talking about? Some of you know, thinking about, oh, those birthday parties that you must attend. Oh, and the overnight sleepovers that you have to host. Those organized play dates, and oh, even worse, team mom. All the things that do not reside in my DNA. So, I have a dear friend who says to me, no, you don't represent any of this. But what I do know about you personally is that you seem to be the biggest advocate for children that I happen to know. Maybe. She might be onto something. But in all honesty, the way that I interpret it, the way that I see it, is I just want every single child to embody the affirmation, to walk in like they own the place. And by that I mean exuding confidence, being comfortable in their own skin, and have a sense of worth that they too belong. The challenge, however, is that the overwhelming statistics about African American boys and public school education, in particular in Baltimore, make it seem impossible to envision such a space. Here are just a few of those stats. 90% of 4th grade boys cannot read at grade level. Just 3% of African American boys participate in gifted and talented programs in Baltimore City. Only 60% of black males graduate from high school in Baltimore City. And of that 60%, almost half of them will graduate from their high schools still reading only at an 8th grade level. And finally, only 3% of these black males who graduate from college within a 6-year period after their graduation from a Baltimore City high school. So in recent years, former State Superintendent of Education, Nancy Grasmick, has acknowledged some really interesting findings about public school education in the state of Maryland. And one comment that she is quoted as saying in particular is that African American male children are valued least of all among the children in our public schools. And sometimes that message is clear to me when I listen to the anecdotes of African American mothers who share stories about how their sons seem to be disciplined more often in classes, or the unwillingness to academically challenge that child who seems bright, but he's also been labeled a troublemaker. Or my own personal example of that first grade teacher who decided to share with my 6-year-old son and the other 25 kids in his classroom graphic and very vivid stories of slavery, which included descriptions of whips, chains, and even lynchings. 6 years old. Mind you, we had an interesting conversation, and we will, as I can say now, we were able to resolve our differences around that particular issue. But these are messages that are contrary to all the teachings that I'm offering my child at home about self-esteem and self-confidence that she's negating in a public school setting. So, because of these reasons, I became a part of a project called Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys, which actually will come to fruition with a planned scheduled opening of fall 2015. We will receive our first class of 264 young males and their committed parents who want them to be a part of our school. Our tuition-free public charter school is designed with a liberal arts curriculum. Yes, the humanists had some say over what the curriculum looked like. And will prepare 4th through 12th grade boys for college readiness and success. The creation of this safe space at that particular starting point is not arbitrary, because many people ask me, why are you starting with 4th grade? That seems so random. And my response is often simple. There's a notion called the 4th grade failure syndrome, which mentions 2 things in particular. It says to us that in the 4th grade is generally when boys seem to lose an interest in school, and they also seem to lose interest in reading anything at all. And with the advent of the technology our boys have access to now, that makes it even more difficult, because they'd rather sit behind a screen instead of read. The second shift that happens is that many educators begin to look at that 5-year-old cute little Niles, who is now 10, and he becomes a nuisance and a classroom troublemaker. Now, this is certainly not set to be a panacea for all the ills that are affecting young African American boys in Baltimore City. But this school is my commitment to cultivate an environment where, contrary to the messages these boys are exposed to, they are reminded daily that they are worthy and that they are loved. It's also to show those mothers who come to our information sessions crying and pleading for that one spot in our school that we too believe in their sons. So wow, who knew 7 years ago a simple hotel key card would sow the seed for all of that? This last 4 years has not been a cakewalk at all. The struggle of creating a school, like any other ambitious project, is not an easy one. Whether I wanted to or not, I've had to play politics with the lives of children. I've had to sit in educational spaces where I've had to sit on my hands and say nothing. And anyone knows me, that's a tough challenge. And I've also had to learn a lot about K-12 pedagogy that still does not make sense to me today. And even in those moments where I felt powerless, unheard, and defeated, I remembered why and for who I was there. And like any other good parent, I also knew that I had to practice what I preached. So I walked in like I owned the place.